Well, there it is. They were part of his speech today, not the most fired up political piece of oratory we've ever seen in our lives, but I guess it was a sombre tone for a serious subject. I'm joined now by behavioural psychologist Jo Hemmings is with us. Afternoon to you, Jo. Always good to get your take on these things. What is when you hear that phrase "sick note Britain"? What do you think of when you hear that?
Really, it doesn't seem a really appropriate thing for our Prime Minister to say. But I do find it a bit rich that he's complaining about the sick note culture when, in fact, if there was a better support system in mental health and physical health, but I think he was probably particularly referring to mental health, then perhaps people would have a bit more support and help with their concerns and wouldn't feel the need to go off work sick.
I mean, he literally paid people's wages for about 2 years, though, when he was Chancellor, of course, and nobody has ever done that before. They've thrown vast amounts of money into the welfare system, so it's not as if they can say, oh, it was the other lot that did it, because they did that. You could argue it didn't go to all the right places. But, I mean, there's no shortage of evidence, if you like, that they've certainly, in physical cash terms, he's been splashing it like no other.
Yeah, he's been splashing it to individuals, absolutely true, both during, obviously, with furlough and so on, during COVID, and to a degree, welfare benefits. But it's a bit like closing the stable door after the horse is bolted. Because if there were more resources put into mental health, so people who knew the difference could easily be assessed to find out the difference between simple everyday anxiety that we all suffer from and wouldn't stop us going to work, and genuine, for example, clinical depression, which needs proper treatment, I think we wouldn't have half the problem we're going through now. I do think there are some that will take advantage of the system. There always will be. We've had speeches like this in the 70s and the 80s, and it will probably never stop. However, I just find it almost awkward that he's berating the very people where the system has actually failed them in terms of public services.
In terms of this business, this distinction, I suppose, between someone who is suffering from depression. In his speech, he was at pains to acknowledge that that is clearly a thing that needs to be taken very seriously. But of course, he got into talking about other issues, those who have a bit of anxiety, how we are over-medicalising just everyday woes. And he's got to be right on that, hasn't he? How can we suddenly have 1 million people who are off work because of a feeling of anxiety? Something's gone wrong.
Look, something has gone wrong. I think where it's gone wrong is there is much more candour and transparency and sharing of our mental health issues now, which is a good thing. But if you don't back that up with a proper understanding, which probably has to start in school on a curriculum, so that kids understand how they might be more resilient, coping mechanisms, what's just perfectly normal in terms of stress and anxiety and what isn't, what are the things to look out for, and a better support system, people would by this stage have the knowledge and the understanding of that difference. It's quite clear, but clearly not to some people who just simply don't understand it. There aren't resources out there to explain it to them. And so they feel that they can't work when in fact they probably could.
Well, I was going to say, have we kind of either re-educated or kind of recalibrated the human condition? And whilst it's been good that you can talk, if you said to somebody 25 years ago, I think I've got a mental health problem, they would have probably laughed at you. And certainly in the workplace, you'd have been talking to a brick wall, frankly. So, yes, it's great that we can now talk more openly about this stuff. But in doing so, have we over-medicalised those everyday woes? The fact that you're feeling a bit anxious doesn't mean to say you have a mental health condition. You're just feeling a bit anxious.
It doesn't.
Life is all about that. But because we talk about it and because your mate might go, oh, you might have a mental health problem, and because we've almost given that as a label for people to self-identify with, are we the architects of our own downfall on this?
No, because I disagree with the word over-medicalisation. I think people literally don't understand. It's good that we're sharing. It's good that we're talking about it. You're right. 20 years ago, it would have been very difficult. But nobody actually says, I've got a mental health problem. They say, I'm feeling depressed, when actually they're having a rotten day and they'll be okay the next morning.
But that's the point, though, isn't it? That is exactly what he's saying. It's not a mental health problem. You're just having a bad day.
How do people know that? How do they recognise that when everyone's talking about it and no one's been educated on it? So nobody really knows. These people don't know the difference. And it's so important. Without that information, which should start at a very early age, so you learn coping mechanisms for everyday stress. Without that,
But Jo, we do know the difference, don't we? We know the difference. You know, we've
I,
all had
I'm
some rotten days. I had a terrible day on Monday, I think it was, and but Tuesday I had a great day, and I'm aware of that. And most people are aware of that.
No, I don't think they are. This is where I disagree. I
Really?
don't, because what you're then suggesting that people are, that they know that they're perfectly okay and they're choosing not to go to work. When in fact, I think most people genuinely, if they felt they could work, would want to work. It's not a lazy bunch of people. These are people that just think, I'm not feeling up to it. And there's no one to say, well, what is wrong with you? People writing these fit notes or sick notes or whatever they may be at the time, when actually, and we're now talking about people who are health professionals but not your GP doing it. They've got no medical records on you, they've got no relationship with you. I actually think he's making a pretty poor situation worse. That's how I feel, and we'll still be in this position but worse off in a few years' time if he doesn't address it from the bottom up, which is educating people on the difference.
You may be right on that. Jo, thank you. Always good to get your take on these things. Jo Hemmings, behavioural psychologist, with us here on TalkTV.